My name's Steve Zipkes. I'm the founding principal of Manor New Technology High School. I started the school 9 years ago. I was a longtime high school principal, and I really started the school with a piece of paper. So 9 years ago, Manor we have 9,000 students in our district. We had one high school, one middle school, and 4 elementaries. The high school, the middle school, and one of the elementaries were low-performing schools, 3 out of 4 years. We had a sense of urgency. We needed to do something. I'd love to tell you the reason we started this school was because of that, but that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was Samsung was going to do a $4 billion expansion somewhere in the world, and Samsung's in our backyard, Samsung Semiconductor. And so with that, the governor's office said, I'll tell you what, we'll give you $4 million, the school district, and give Samsung tax incentives if you expand in Texas. So what do you think the school district wanted? We're in Texas. What did they want? They wanted a new football stadium. And the governor's office and Samsung said, absolutely not. So they said, okay, we'll open up a STEM school. Well, this was 9 years ago. Nobody knew what STEM was. We're still struggling with what STEM is today. So we started this. So we got $4 million over a 5-year period to open up a school. I had complete autonomy to do whatever I wanted in order to make the school successful. I couldn't pass up that opportunity. But again, I also had challenges because our target students, we were going to be one of the first 32 STEM schools in the state of Texas, and we were supposed to serve underrepresented students. So I bring this slide up, and I had to really think about how I was going to get students to come from a low-performing school to come over to a new school for STEM, to take more math and science. That just wasn't going to happen. So I really had to do some thought processing and figure it out myself. I was going to go from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. I didn't know what I was doing. I had experience with what I knew, but again, you don't know what you don't know. So I couldn't fault myself, but I just said, here's what we're going to do. I know this doesn't work. I said, first thing we're going to do is I'm not going to run the same schedule because most schedules are run by athletic period, band, or your bus schedule. And I said, we're not going to do that. We're going to run by academics. And so I ran a trimester schedule. And the reason I ran a trimester schedule was, so 12 weeks, 12 weeks, and 12 weeks. That equals a whole regular 180-day school year. But instead of 2 semesters, we had 3. And the reason was because the kids at Manor High School or Manor Middle School, they didn't care if they failed. Our district was set 90% free and reduced. They didn't care if they failed because they got free summer school. But secondary summer school in Texas is only 10 days. It's not anything. I wouldn't care if I failed either. I'll just go to summer school for 10 days and I'll get credit. Because typically summer school, at least in Texas, and secondary, is not taught by a teacher. You get on a computer program, Play-Doh or whatever it is. You get on and you work through it and you get your credit. But what we saw was that the kids, once summer school was filled that didn't get in, then those kids weren't paying $100 to go 5 miles up the road to Austin or Pflugerville or Round Rock, and those gaps were getting larger and larger. So my thought was, if we ran 3 trimesters, one trimester, 12 weeks, equals actual an 18-week semester. So 2 12 weeks, 24 weeks, equals a full year, 36 weeks. That gave us 12 weeks if students failed to capture them to close that achievement gap. That was my thought process behind that. So with that, we did that, and that was the first that's happened, and kind of, it wasn't a non-negotiable. See, sometimes we have to think outside the box. We think it's a non-negotiable, but it's not a non-negotiable. It can be changed. It's just up to the district to say yes or no. A non-negotiable would be something like a grant, that you got a federal grant that you have to comply with to get that money or to whatever. So bus schedule is not a non-negotiable. That is negotiable. The second thing was I said, if I'm going to get students to come over here to this new school, we weren't going to teach the same way anymore. We weren't going to teach direct teaching anymore. The students we have today are not the same students we had even in 2007. I mean, technology has grown exponentially. When I started this school 9 years ago, we have, if you came to our school, you'll see we have ports in there. And the reason is if we have ports, because if I put 400 students on a wireless network 9 years ago, it'd have been super slow. Well, I can put 1,000 kids on the wireless network now, it's no problem. But when I started, we were one-to-one. Students had access, when they went to a classroom, they had an iMac or they had a PC. Because I said, well, I want them to know both platforms, because PC runs the business world and Mac ran the artistic world. Well, by the time we opened, it didn't matter anyway, because they ran parallels, and so they could go either platform. So we've gone from that to iMacs, to MacBook Pros, to MacBook Pro 2s, and now over the last 3.5 years, we've been iPads, and then we've gone to Airs, iPad Airs. But that wasn't until 3.5 years ago, that students actually took technology home. But one thing I said is we're going to change. We're not going to push information out to students. We're not going to bore them to death. We're not going to ask them to open chapter 3, read it, and at the end do unit test, memorize this information, and then do a unit test. So we're not going to push information out to them. We're going to make the learners, the students, actually engage in the learning process. So we're going to do project-based learning. We're going to do project-based instruction. We're going to change our delivery model. And so everything at our school is project-based learning. For those that are new in here, we run 5 classes a day, about 75 minutes a class, 5 projects going on all the time. So all of our humanities are team-taught integrated classes. That's 2 credits in 1 class. Most of our math and sciences are integrated. There's another 2 credits in 1 class. So, and then that gives you 3 other classes to fill out the rest of the graduation requirements. So our students are averaging 7+ credits in 5 classes a day, a trimester. They're averaging, the state requires 23 credits to graduate. Our students are graduating anywhere from 36 to 42 credits. And so our students are graduating with 6 years of math, 7 years of science, and 7.5 years of engineering.
Are some of those transferable to college?
Oh, dual credit. Dual credit. So we don't offer any AP classes, and that was by design, because if we offered AP classes and all of a sudden we got all the AP kids from the low-performing high school, we'd be considered a brain drain. And that wasn't our target. Our target students were the underrepresented students. So we offered no AP classes until last year. Last year was the first time we offered AP calculus. Even though they went and took the test, that was the first year we actually had an AP class. But we offered dual credit. So our teachers are adjunct faculty at community college. They either have their master's in their content area or everybody has multiple certifications. I guess I should say, first of all, we have 384 students in our school, have about 30 teachers in our school. We're a Gates Small School design, so we were designed for only 400. However, we're already starting to scale up. Construction starts this summer, and we'll grow to 600 for not this year, next year, but the year after will be 600. We're opening another middle school that's going to be a new tech middle school for 600. We're going to float a bond next year to where we'll have a 1,200 student new tech high school, and then our school will become the second new tech middle school, so I'll have 2 feeders feeding into our 1,200 student new tech school. With that, I said, first of all, we're going to have a different schedule. We're going to teach project-based learning, and we're not going to teach in silos anymore. And what I meant by that is I'm not going to have the math department over here, the English department over here, and the science department over here, and they shall never meet except during a staff meeting. I said that ain't going to happen anymore. We're going to integrate content so we could create real-world, authentic projects. And so with that, most of our classes are integrated content. That's 2 teachers in 1 class. But what that doesn't mean is You play good cop, you play bad cop, or you get your 45 minutes to teach your standards and I get my 45 minutes to teach. You take the standards in your scope and sequence, you blend them together to create an authentic project. So at the end of that trimester, you've covered the standards, and they've got a credit in that class and a credit in the other class. And then finally, it wasn't just about content. If it was about content, we'd all be superstars because we've taught the same thing for the last 80 years the same way. I said it's not just about content. It's about content and essential skills, 21st century skills. A lot of people call them soft skills, but they're not soft skills. That just makes my hair stand up. They're essential skills. And I like to tell stories, so I'm going to tell you this story. I've made several trips to the White House now, and I was on a panel at the White House on high school redesign. And I went into this room, and it was the longest table I'd ever seen in my life. One piece of wood. It was huge. And I go in there, and there's 3 principals in there, and the rest of the people are, we had Arnie Duncan, we had the Secretary of Labor, we had all these business executives there, and we were looking at high school redesign. And at the time, we're sitting there going around and we're talking, and well, I sat in the middle of the table because I figured all like the U.S. secretaries would sit up at the front. Of course not. They sat directly across from me. I was like, gosh, right across from me. So I'm kind of like face to face with them, and then the whole time I'm talking about 21st century skills. Because in my mind, I'm thinking about my students. My students have huge learning gaps. You know, how can I make sure those kids are successful to be able to go out into the world and be successful? They're not your AP top kids. The whole time we're there, we're talking, and Secretary Duncan's talking about Common Core and assessments, and at the same time we're talking about how can community colleges give high school credit, and we're looking at redesign. And I knew I was on the right track because I'm sitting next to the executive vice president of IBM, and he says, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to tell you right now, you can graduate with a 4.0 from, I think he said it was from Columbia. If you don't know how to communicate, you don't know how to team, collaborate, you don't know how to problem solve, IBM's not going to hire you. I knew right then and there I was on the right track because it wasn't just about content. It's important, but you have to have these skills. So in our school, we've run all kinds of learning outcomes. When we started, we had 8 learning outcomes and content. We ran that for 5 years. We reinvented ourselves, and we came up with 5 learning outcomes, or 21st century skills. It was written communication, oral communication, collaboration, critical thinking, work ethic, global and community engagement. Well, that was the first time. Now we've reinvented ourselves again, and we have 5 learning outcomes, and we run those outcomes, and they're evaluated, assessed in every single project. So they're not just add-on, and I think y'all do the same thing in Colorado. You integrate your 21st century skills into your standards. The question is, how do you teach those? That's what the teachers need to understand, because they can get the content, but how do you teach critical thinking? How do you teach communication? What does it look like? So at the end of every one of our projects, a student may be launching a project in one class, presenting in another, and researching in 3. But as soon as they complete a project, they do a public presentation. And typically, it's gone down a little bit. I'd like to say it's higher, but it's been higher in the past. But typically, it's to a panel of parents or experts, whatever the project's on. It's not to the teacher and to the class, even though they're there. And the panel's there, and they're grading their presentation skills with a simple Likert scale, eye contact, projection of voice, using filler words. So at the end of that year, if they have 5 projects going on all the time, each teacher averages 10 to 15 projects a year. Each project lasts 3 to 4 weeks long. That averages out to 50 projects each student that completes every year. That's 50 public presentations every year. I can't tell you how huge that is. That is insanely, That's what helps our students the most. Remember, our kids have no AP classes, but yet they're graduating. Their transcript shows 6 math credits, 7 science credits. They apply to college. That college admissions counselor says, well, I just want to talk to that student. What is all this math and science? So they get in for an interview. If they get an interview, they're in because they know how to talk. By the time they've graduated, they've given over 200 public speeches. So those essential skills for us are primary, and that's what they're getting in today. Here's another thing I had to think about, redesigning. So when we look at team-taught classes, you're looking at FTEs, the administrative standpoint, you got to look at your sense of urgency. What is your sense of urgency? For me, I had to do something. So our class sizes right now are about 25, 26 to 1. In a singleton class, if you're a team-taught teacher, it's still 25. You'll have 2 teachers in there. I just don't have the big enough space in the classroom. But as we redesign the new middle school and the high school, we'll have larger spaces to where we can accommodate 50 students with 2 teachers in there. As long as you have the room to move around. So when I go into a classroom to observe, I better hear noise. I better hear talking. I better see students engaged and moving around and interacting, collaborating with each other. And if you sit there long enough, students get off task, but so do we. I don't sit at my desk 24/7, and I dare say I bet you don't either. But yet we expect students to. And when they don't, oh my gosh, you're off task. But if you sit there long enough, 90% of the time, they're on the task on their project. They get off to talk about some other thing. Do they once in a while get off to play a game on their iPad? Yep, but you know what? They're always working on those projects. And so it's about creating that ownership and that autonomy, not only with teachers, but with your students as well. And that was kind of my whole thought process about this whole school and how to put it together. And so far it's been pretty good. Does anybody, I know Carrie's been to our school. Y'all been to school. Anybody else know anything about our school? So in 2013, I got a call. President Obama came to our school, and he came to our school to look at project-based instruction. And based upon that, that's why all these visits to the White House and these panels I've been on. In fact, on the high school redesign, it was $300 million race to the top grant. It got dropped down to $100 million, but it's still out there. You can apply for race to the top grant for that $100 million, and we're the first school listed as a model school to model after. So I'm not saying that we have all the answers, because we certainly don't, but if you're looking at how to transform or why you should transform, it would be a good opportunity just to look at it and go look at the school and research the school and the data.
We recently, very recently, visited High Tech High in San Diego. So it's new,
Sure.
new to me. But can you point out if there are any big differences between your?
So there's a lot of similarities. They don't write rubrics because they don't have standards. So you're standard based. You're held to state tests. They're not. So and that's good and bad because they can be creative as they want. The bad thing is they burn out teachers left and right because you always have to come up with something on your own to create versus having a scope and sequence of standards. So they don't have standards that they have to follow. But the projects and the processes are very similar. And they have some outstanding teachers. Don't get me wrong. They have some great teachers, and they don't go outside of their San Diego area. But they have some really good things going on. It's just the difference is I'd love to be able to go in and create anything I want to, but then if as administrator you come in, you're just teaching a bunch of fluff. What if I teach these great projects and all of a sudden I take this test and they bomb? Well, I didn't do it, then I'm held accountable. So that's the big difference.
One of the big things that he did was he decided that as a staff, we were going to create staff committees. And so teachers would be empowered to take action on different aspects of our school operations. And so being a member of several different committees was very helpful for letting teachers know that we need to be able to, let's say, put prom together. So we're going to have a committee of teachers that are going to work on prom. Community service hours was a big part of our school when we opened up. So we needed to have a community service committee that was going to be tasked with helping students make sure that they track their community service hours. So there are several different ways that Steve formally had us put together leadership systems and structures in place, but then informally, he developed a sense of culture where we were able to make mistakes, and we were given quite a bit of latitude to try something out, try something new, and if it failed, it was okay, so long as we failed forward and learned from our mistakes and carried that forward and didn't repeat those mistakes. And he also encouraged us to share what we learned so that we could then go on and, have teachers avoid a lot of the roadblocks that we ran into and stumbled on, in our way of figuring out what worked and what didn't work in our classes. We had regular staff meetings where there would be parts of our school that would come into question because teachers would be very passionate about our school. And I'd have to say that that was probably one of the things that helped us to move forward in our school and just survive. The fact that teachers were very passionate about their vision of what project-based learning looked like in their content and how the school should be run. And so there were things like dress code, for example, that Steve would have us weigh in on. I can remember several different staff meetings where someone would say that, kids wearing hats in the building was an issue. And so Steve would, put the entire staff together and say, was it really an issue? I mean, are kids sitting there? Are they engaged? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Is the only issue that they're wearing a ball cap? And so as a staff, he would put it back on us and say, what do you think? Do you think that this is a reasonable expectation to tell our kids not to wear ball caps? And most of the teachers said, you know what, I don't care if a kid wears a baseball cap in my classroom or not. So long as he's turning in his assignments, he's focused, and he's being respectful. But then we also had teachers who raised their hand and said, well, I was in the military for X number of years, and we don't wear hats in the building. So when the kids go into my classroom, I don't want them wearing hats. And so Steve said, you know what, I can respect that. In every other class, if the teacher's okay with it, you can wear hats. In this particular class, if the teacher sets that expectation with their students and communicates that expectation, then they don't wear hats in that classroom. And so that was very empowering for us, for him to not only have us form committees, have these discussions, but also for him to ask us what was working and what was not working in our classrooms, and how could we best serve the kids that we had, because like Steve mentioned earlier, we weren't going after the top cream of the crop kids. We're going after kids who are kind of in the middle and kind of on that bubble of maybe being successful in school, maybe not, and just having that one little thing that might set them off and just send them down the wrong path. We don't want to set those kids down the wrong path. We want to meet them where they are, and Steve gave us the tools and the capability to be able to, find common ground with those kids, set those expectations with our students, and then be able to get them as far as we could.
And one of the things we talked about is, you probably already said it, I really like the flat leadership kind of model, and I don't have a model to follow after. So we basically, it's free for all, man. So I'm building this plane as we're flying it, right? And what worked, great. If it didn't work, we reassessed it and come up and figured out what actually would work when doing that. Having that freedom and that autonomy to do that, it was really invigorating for the staff to be able to feel like that they had a skin in the game and they had some ownership and some stake in, and to really modeling what they wanted the school to be like.
Did this require any latitude away from the teacher contract, or were you able to do this all within, or did you have to sign, were there waivers?
So we're a non-union state. Are y'all non-union? Okay. So we're non-union, so we can do whatever we want, but I still respect teachers' workday, right? So within that workday. So everything revolved in the workday. But then again, it's kind of like what I talked about, creating projects. You're developing ownership. I'm not giving you something just to give you something. I'm giving you an opportunity to take a leadership role to develop ownership in how you want the school. You can't complain if you developed it, if you were given an opportunity and you didn't take it. Well, you can't complain now because I gave you that opportunity. You can only complain if I just force you to do that. And so it wasn't about forcing anyone to do that.
And that being said, Steve also found partnerships that were outside of our school that he empowered teachers to be liaisons for. So for example, we had new tech network liaisons that would communicate between the school and the network and help to ensure that we had fidelity to the model. We also had the teacher advancement program at the time, and Steve set up a system where we had master teachers and mentor teachers for the rest of the staff. So we could go to them if we had questions. There were also several opportunities that Steve would help to plug teachers into district leadership positions. So for example, we would get the opportunity to present professional development to the rest of the district. So there were several different ways to plug in for teachers who wanted to find that, little bit extra to help them develop their skills and to grow as a professional.
You talked a lot about fail-safe environment, growth mindset, and kind of your staff, and how important your staff is, and what a great environment you have. I'm curious what your hiring process looks like. How do you get the right people in that space to thrive, and what does that look like?
Well, the beauty is when you have something that's so successful, my attrition rate, I have 3 years plus of 100% teacher retention. No one leaves. If they do leave, they get stolen to either become central office people, or they're going for the PhD or something else. No one leaves this to go teach somewhere else and to go back to direct teach. There's no way it's going to happen. And really, I've kind of changed the process over the years. A lot of it was, I wasn't looking for content experts. And if you came and saw my staff, well, you see a lot of them, they're pretty young. Not everybody, but some of them are. And then what I looked for was really somebody that could come in and fit into the culture to take the school to the next level. Not necessarily content experts, although they're all content experts. All my math and science teachers are teach grads. So, but it's more about being able to come in and take us to that next level. Not afraid to add to your toolbox. If you come in and you know everything, I don't want you. Go somewhere else. I'm sure somebody would love to have you, but I want someone that comes in that has a sense of, I've got all these things, but I'm willing to add to it to take it to the next level. So I've had teachers I had a teacher who had 16 years plus experience. She had to leave because her son was in movies, so she had to go back to Hollywood. But then I have teachers that have no teaching experience at all, but they come in and they're like sponges, and then when you give this, once you've had that opportunity to be creative and to have that ownership, you'll never go back. You would take on this whole leadership that you've never had before. So it's really, now I have them. I say them. I have teachers that they'll interview people first, and then they'll send them to me, whoever they choose. Where in the past, I've had 1 or 2 people, and I've been in there, and they may be looking at content. I'm really looking at how they can fit in. I've made 1 or 2 bad hires before, but most of them have been pretty good. When we used to use, what was that? We used to use that
Gallup poll?
Oh, the Gallup thing. Yeah, that was something.
Can you talk a little bit about how you guys came up with that vision? Is that a collaborative decision? And then how do you go about assessing that and refining it as the years come on?
So that's a really good question, and I think to answer that would be, we were considered at first an R&D site, research and design or development site for a district. You never get those, right, in the school district. Businesses have them, but we never have them. But our thing was, let's figure out these best practices and how do we scale them up. And the district has changed leadership over time. In fact, there's nobody there in the district that has been there longer than I have starting the school. But reality was, we were supposed to take this design and how do we scale that up for district scale up? And when we looked at that, who are the hardest teachers to change? Come on, y'all know. Who? The high school teachers. They're the hardest teachers to change. So we turned it upside down and we started at the elementary. And our thought process was, if we start at the elementary and we build capacity, by the time those students and the parents have gone through years of project-based instruction and this model, by the time they got to high school, they would demand it, right? And so that's kind of been how we designed this moving up. So we're almost at that stage now where every school, with the exception of the comprehensive high school, is going PBL. The vision is high school will eventually go PBL, but it takes a long time to turn that big Titanic around, right? It's still, they're on the verge of, on their state testing, are they going to be acceptable or unacceptable? We're at the stage where, are we going to be exemplary or not exemplary kind of thing. So it's turning that Titanic around, and then again having the leadership to say, well, we'll take those best practices and we'll move them to the high school to do that. They've had, I think I've gone through 5 high school principals since I started the comprehensive high school, gone through 4 superintendents and 3 sets of school board members. In fact, I was district manager last year for about 5-6 weeks because we didn't have anybody. So, but we're doing great. We're doing awesome. But I think where we're at a point now is that we're very passionate about what we do. And the reason is because we've seen it, not only have we outperformed the state in every content area, take that completely away, what we've seen is change students' lives completely. I mean, you see some of our kids, and I hate to use this term, but they come in and you'd say, oh, they look like gangbangers. You know, I hate to use that term, but you would think that, you know, these are kids that are always in the wrong place at the wrong time. But then all of a sudden you see they've never had success, and all of a sudden you see them getting success, and now their parents are coming up to school and they're on panel, and the only time they have experience coming to school is because they got a phone call because their kid's in trouble, and now all of a sudden they're seeing their kids in presentations. It's changing their lives. So we've had 5 graduating classes. We're at a 99.4% graduation rate. I can count on 2 hands all the students in 5 years that have considered dropouts, even though they're not dropouts. They completed, they just didn't pass one of the state assessments. 2 of them are full-time students at Austin Community College. Other ones, you know, military, whatever. But anyway, so you take that 99.4% graduation rate, 100% of those students have been accepted and gone to college. Of those 100%, about 80% into 4-year universities, the other 20% into 2-year colleges or community colleges, and we're sitting at about 62 to 63% are first generation. So we're seeing that that's what's making a difference. And if we take that all aside, just for high school, I got the highest attendance rate in the entire district. I got it sitting at a 97% attendance rate, higher than the elementaries, and they got a captured audience, right? That bus drops them off, they can't go anywhere. Our kids come to school, they want to be there. So we're sitting, and this is every year. So I've got a 97% attendance rate, and for those that weren't here, the last 2 years, it's insane. I've had 4 discipline referrals in 2 years. That's it. That's crazy. That's crazy. But it's about developing that culture of that student ownership, and that they're actually in charge of their learning. I'm not going to twist your arm to learn to do this, but once you start that culture, the students hold each other accountable in your projects. So as you develop your project and you have your student groups, they draw off that contract. They're the ones holding each other accountable. You're no longer the heavy hand as the teacher. The same thing as the campus level. If the teachers all have ownership and they develop this culture that we're all going to be leaders and we're going to do this, you as the administrator don't have to be the heavy hand anymore, because they'll hold each other accountable. And if somebody's off that, they'll be the ones getting on to bringing them back to where they want to go.
And we also have data that shows that the students are taking that sense of ownership with them as they leave. Because it'd be one thing to get 100% of our graduating kids into college. That's pretty, that's pretty good. The data that we have also shows that we have an 80% persistence rate. So
from
the kids,
National Student Clearinghouse.
right. So the kids aren't just getting into college; they're staying in college, and they're finishing up. This year, I think, is the first year that we've got a large number of kids that will be graduating from college.
What their experience is like, and is that moving the colleges forward to consider alternatives of any kind?
Great question. Over the last 3 years, 4 years, we have trained more higher. Bless you. We've trained more higher ed colleges of ed in PBL. University of Miami, Ohio, the College of Ed, University of Texas College of Ed, Sam Houston State University, because they're seeing they can't continue putting out teachers the same way they have, because what business would run the same way if the clientele changed? Well, they're seeing that the clientele's changing, so they're having to change. We're having students that come back. In fact, they come back at Christmas, right? Christmas. Every year they come back, we'll have a panel, and they'll tell us what's happening in their classes, and what they're finding out is that when I went to the University of Texas, I don't think I ever gave a presentation, ever. I just turned in stuff, but they're having to do presentations now. And they're coming back saying, you know, all these students, they're all panicking because we got to do a presentation. We just go up there and give a presentation. It's nothing. And because of the 5 projects all the time, their time management skills are unbelievable, right? So they don't have to worry about if they're not getting the information from the TA or whoever's teaching the class, they know how to go research it, and they also know how to put study groups together, and that's what they're doing. So they're coming back saying, these skills have really helped us, because we may be in a class of 275 students in there, they don't even know who we are, and if we don't get the information, I know how to go research it, or I know how to put together a study group, and I'll get to it right then and there. So they're coming back and telling us those things. Anything else you can think of?
And as a quick aside, so someone asked earlier about that sense of empowerment that we have as staff. Steve has also done a really good job of sharing that with students as well. As you mentioned, every winter in December, we have our kids in college come back and sit on a panel and talk to our student body. Well, that happens before our staff versus student basketball game. It was originally brought up and proposed by students, and so that's how that started. The students wanted to have some culture building activity that we had right at the beginning, or sorry, right at the end of our first semester, because we don't have a homecoming at our school. So the kids really wanted to have something that they felt would bring back some of the alumni, and so the alumni were invited to come back and play on the staff side so that we have a fighting chance against our students. And before the game, they sit on a long panel in front of the gym, in front of all the students, and all the students just ask them questions about what's it like to, you know, live in college, what are hard lessons that you've learned, did coming to this school help you out in surviving and navigating through college?
So a lot of people think, well, it's project-based learning, so you don't do any type of pencil paper test, you don't do an assessment. We do assessments all the time. We do unit tests, we do benchmarks, mid-year benchmarks, we do pencil tests, we do all kinds of formal and informal assessments all along the way, so they get all that. So we use data for everything. Well, I'm glad y'all are here, because I'm kind of the outlier, and the reason is because I don't follow the same trend that most administrators go, and the reason is because I've lived it. I've been a high school principal and a principal for over 20 years, so I've been there, but I know it works. I just was never given that freedom to do that. Well, now that I've had that freedom to do that, now we became a national demonstration site and a national STEM school and a national PBL school. Well, these things are proven out that, yes, you can do these things, and you can change the culture of the school and the direction of it.
So, you know, as occupational therapists, our training is about projects, you know, about doing, and we call it activity analysis, and what are all the components that go into completing an activity or a project. And I guess I'm just curious, you know, how, if teachers get special training on how to create projects, how do you design them, develop them?
See that training they're going through in there? Every one of my teachers get the same exact training. So here's the beauty of our training, our Think Forward training. It was written by practitioners that teach PBL in the classroom. They're actual practitioners in the classroom. We wrote the processes in order to, what we feel is to have an effective project. Because there's a big difference, again, between doing projects and project-based learning. Big difference. And they just started the process of going through ideation right now. Then they're going to go into rubrics. And now how do you take your standards and how do you embed them within a rubric to show accountability? That's big, is to be able to show accountability. the Dana Center came through, I think the second year we were open, first year we were open, and they saw one of our rubrics, and they said they've been in hundreds of schools that did PBL. But the problem was there was no accountability. So you could have a beautiful project, but it could be fluff. How do I know that you're teaching what needs to be covered, right?
Right.
So we added a column that here's the standard, and you can see directly where it's embedded within the rubric. So when you look at your scope and sequence, you can say, well, that standard's covered, this standard's covered. So no longer are you, someone can say, well, you're just teaching fluff. No, I'm teaching, here are the state standard. And then, of course, you assess it along the way. And so you can see if you've mastered it or been able to transfer that information over to a different calling. So thank y'all. Thanks for taking time out of your day.